Good afternoon or good morning wherever you might be, and welcome to today's webinar, Traffic Noise Practitioner Summit, brought to you by the Center for Environmental Excellence by AASHTO. I'm Katie Kurgan, the Senior Program Manager for Environment at AASHTO, and I'd like to get started by going over a few housekeeping items to help you participate in today's event. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. While the phone speakers have been muted, you have the opportunity to submit questions by typing them into the questions window of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Additionally, you'll see a panel on the right-hand side of your window where you can submit these questions. If you'd like to shrink the panel, there's an arrow at the top of it that'll push that aside to give you full viewing of the PowerPoint slides. Today's webinar is being recorded for later viewing and will be posted on the Center for Environmental Excellence's website, environment.transportation.org. The Center for Environmental Excellence by AASHTO was established in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration to assist state departments of transportation expedite project delivery and promote environmental stewardship. In assisting with project delivery challenges through technical assistance, peer exchanges of successful practices, and preparation of technical resource documents and the delivery of partnership building opportunities. The Center, in cooperation with Federal Highway Administration, gathered noise experts from state departments of transportation last October and examined the state of traffic noise analysis, modeling, policies, and practices in the transportation environment. Today's webinar will provide a summary of what the meeting, important issues, and how they're being addressed, and research guidance and needs. I'd like to now turn it over to Mark Ferroni, the Noise Program Manager for the Federal Highway Administration in Washington, D.C., to provide a few opening remarks. Mark?
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Ferroni from the Federal Highway Administration. Just really quick, I wanted to go over some objectives of the summit. Obviously, I think the obvious one is to develop and facilitate the peer exchange itself. That was done in large by Bill Bowlby and Associates, and I guess the first step of that was trying to identify all the state noise practitioners in each state. There's been a lot of turnover over the past couple years, and that was a rather large undertaking, one that we did not anticipate, but we were able to contact each state noise person and invite them to the summit. So after the summit, the objective was to define a noise roadmap for the future and kind of identify the takeaways from the summit itself, and then really kind of shape the noise program both at the federal level and at the state level going into the future. So the organizers of the summit was the Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, AASHTO's consultant, which was Bill Bowlby and Associates, and then a summit advisory group. I definitely want to point out that Federal Highways, AASHTO, and Bowlby and Associates really allowed the summit advisory group to set the framework of the agenda. There was a survey that was sent out to all those that were participating to get their feedback on some of the things that they were hoping to talk about and discuss and experience in the summit, but it was really a state-led agenda and not an agenda that was led by Federal Highways or AASHTO. So the members of the advisory group were Nola Calla from Ohio, Mariano Burrows from Florida, Cora Helm from Montana, Carol Newvine from Oregon, Danielle Schellenberger from Pennsylvania, and Greg Smith from North Carolina. And with that, I will turn it back to Katie.
Thank you, Mark. I would now like to turn it over to Drs. William Bowlby and Darlene Reeder. Dr. Bowlby has 42 years of experience in transportation noise analysis with emphasis on measurements, modeling, abatement design, methods development, policy analysis, research, and training. He's led work for over 20 state highway agencies, USDOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the National Highway Institute and the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. Dr. Reeder has 22 years of experience in traffic noise analysis and abatement design with 6 years prior experience in transportation planning and traffic engineering. In addition to the numerous projects, noise studies she's conducted and managed, she has played an important role in FHWA's and the NCHRP research and traffic noise training, and as a part-time consultant staff helping manage Tennessee DOT's noise and air quality programs. It's all yours, Bill and Darlene.
Well, thank you, Kate. First of all, I wanted to welcome everyone. It's an honor to be selected to put the summit together, and it's a pleasure to be able to present to all of you today. I'll be covering the initial topics, and I'll turn it over to Darlene for 4 of the topics, and then I'll finish it out and then turn it over to Mark for the question and answer session at the end. We worked over 2 days with the summit. The agenda, as Mark mentioned, was put together by the advisory group to address the most important topics to them and their programs. The first day we focused mostly on issues and concerns related to the Federal Highway Noise Regulation and CFR 23 CFR 772. Type 1 project definitions, the land use activity categories and evaluation methodologies, noise screening, the cost effectiveness reasonableness criterion, and consideration of viewpoints. We finished the day out with a status briefing on TNM3 by Mark, and then a demonstration of some of the features of TNM3 by the development contractor. Second day, we began with a briefing by Mark on a number of other items related to the Federal Highway Noise Program, and then got into a number of topics of interest, including best practices for modeling and review of models, design build projects, construction noise and vibration with an emphasis on wildlife concerns, noise barrier issues related to materials and so forth. And then so the 3 topics of tech transfer, training, and recruiting and how we can improve those. We finished out by talking about this noise roadmap that Mark had mentioned. So as a follow-up to the summit, we did a survey. We had a list of topics of interest, subjects of interest that came out of the summit, and we asked about needs for either additional technical assistance or guidance, or research, or perhaps a change in the noise regulation. We put those results together in a white paper and roadmap that is available on the AASHTO Center for Environmental Excellence website, and I'll show you that reference at the end of the presentation. And so you can see we used the little scoring box on the right. The more filled in the circle was, the higher that need was in terms of positive responses from the participants. We're very pleased that we had delegates from 37 state highway agencies and the District of Columbia, as indicated by the blue states. Several others wanted to come, but had conflicts or were unable to get travel authorization. Also participating were Mark and Rob Effinger from FHWA and AASHTO, along with Mary Ann Rondinella and Mike Roberts of the noise team in the FHWA resource centers. So let me jump into each of the topics. For each topic, we'll show an introductory slide like this of the participants. I'm not going to read their names. You can do that yourselves. We'll then present some highlights from the presentations, perhaps some useful tools or documents that are being used by some of the SHAs, and most of which they'd be glad to make available to you. And then we'll talk about some of the top needs for each topic as we move through the presentation. At the end, again, I'll show you how you can access the PDF files of the presentations and the summit. So with regards to the Type 1 definitions, Type 1 projects obviously consist of a number of other projects beyond the standard construction on new alignment or widening that adds a through travel lane. And some of these other types of projects have created issues for some of the states, either in their definitions or in the amount of needed analysis or how to do that analysis. In particular, 3 of the areas of this list here that were identified were what exactly is substantial vertical alteration that would cause a project to be Type 1, A lot of questions related to auxiliary lanes, and in terms of the last item on the bottom, why things like ride share or park and ride lots need to be included when they would seem to be a very small component of the overall noise environment. And so through the presentations, we got glimpses of a number of issues and approaches that states were using. For example, North Carolina DOT provided 2 examples of projects with issues on auxiliary lanes that were being added as part of safety improvement projects, where the argument could be made that the projects were not type 1 because they ended in turn lanes, which is one of the exceptions in the reg. This first project was a safety improvement project that ended up being abandoned as a project because it was judged to be type 1, and there would have been a need for 6 feasible and reasonable noise barriers. It would have been a very high percentage of the overall project cost. And the second one involved a 4,500-foot auxiliary lane between 2 interchange ramps. And while it exceeded the 2,500-foot length criterion in the FHWA noise policy FAQs for type 1, its status was unclear based on the language in the regulation, in the analysis and abatement guidance document, in the FAQ. So just a couple examples of problems that caused some issues. The Michigan DOT provided another example. This is a 15-mile long project of both capital preventive maintenance for the full corridor, shown in yellow, and a number of miles shown in purple of managed use lanes where they're using the shoulders during peak hours. The managed use lanes were type 1, but as we know in 772, the entire corridor had to be called type 1 because part of it was type 1. As a result, barriers were going to be needed on that section shown at the bottom in yellow, where only preventive maintenance was going to be performed. And so MDOT's solution here was to break the project into 2 separate projects, so they really only had to do the noise analysis on the part with the managed lanes and a little bit of the preventive maintenance up on the top. We had an example from Florida DOT. They developed an approach for dealing with issues that they found in trying to apply the type 1 definitions for the auxiliary lanes and for interchange ramp work. To assist their district offices, they put together a type 1 projects matrix, and we're just showing a piece of this here as an example that expands upon the information in the FHWA documents for type 1 and for not type 1. So just an example of a useful tool. Coming out of this, in terms of the roadmap items, we see there were 5 items shown here that were of high interest in the discussions in the session, and all of them had a fairly high level of interest for more technical assistance and guidance, with auxiliary lanes leading the way, despite the FAQ on that subject. There was some need for research shown in the center column. Again, on substantial vertical alteration, how much vertical alteration is substantial to cause a change in sound levels, some interest in shoulder use and auxiliary lanes. And in terms of regulation change, the only items that showed some interest were further clarification on auxiliary lanes, and then perhaps taking out park and ride lots as a type 1 project. Now, out of this session, there are 2 items that emerged that really apply to a number of the other topics as well. The first of these was that the guidance is currently spread over several resources. It's in the regulation itself, it's in the analysis and abatement guidance document, and it's in the FAQs on the Federal Highway website. And so the states were calling for a consolidation either into a single document or go through these different resources and make the guidance consistent between them. The second takeaway was that there was need for a better mechanism for the SHAs to learn about the new policy interpretations and guidance and FAQs. It seemed that a fair number weren't aware of some of these items. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end on tech transfer. The second topic dealt with the activity categories in the regulation and the evaluation methodologies for non-residential land uses. There was a lot of discussion in this session, probably more issues and questions raised. Some of the items of interest dealt with Category A land uses. There is an updated FAQ on that. We had an example of Wisconsin DOT where a national cemetery was determined not to be Category A because there was no case established for extraordinary serenity with an existing road already passing through it. And cemeteries were a hot topic of discussion, I guess you'd say. Minnesota DOT has actually put together some guidance documents on where to put analysis receptors and how to study them. Tennessee DOT has developed a qualitative definition in terms of frequent human use that would be applied. And then you can see at the bottom a number of places where people sleep were being questioned as whether or not these should fall into Category B, residential or not. And while ideas were exchanged, I can't say we really resolved a lot of these issues. Pennsylvania DOT has a methodology that they use for assessing the non-residential land uses in terms of coming up with an equivalent number of receptors. Not expecting you to read all this, but basically they're developing an amount of usage as shown on the right here for a particular non-residential use such as a playground, and then they're comparing that to a typical amount of usage of a residence that they've calculated, and from that they'll develop an equivalent number of residential units for that non-residential property. Montana DOT has taken that a little bit further, where they're having seasonal adjustments for the use of the facility based on the average number of hours of sunlight in the different months of the year, and then looking at the seasonal usage of the property and developing an adjustment factor to reduce the equivalent receptors that they had calculated in a separate manner. So those were just a couple examples of some of the evaluation methodologies. A fair amount of interest in some of these different subjects in terms of additional technical assistance and guidance. Prime among these was dealing with the definition of what is active versus passive land use, what is frequent human use, what are frequent human use areas with things like trails and cemeteries, shown as item 3. Also, some interest in reclassifying or reconsidering some of the current land uses, identifying and classifying some of the newer land uses that aren't in the Table 1 in the regulation, and again, looking at the equivalent receptors for non-residential land use. Research needs, dealing with active and passive land uses, reclassifying or reconsidering the land uses in the reg, and equivalent receptors. A regulatory change, again, on the reclassification or reconsideration of some of the current assignments within Table 1. Third session focused in on noise screening procedures, and there was a lot of interest in this session. This is both screening in terms of impact assessment and then screening as a way of minimizing or avoiding having to do a detailed noise abatement analysis. Montana DOT made a good case of why a screening procedure would be a very useful thing to have, talking about the long distances to travel from headquarters far corners of the state, the high costs associated with that travel, and the fact that they have limited central office personnel to do all this work. It raised the question of what value is added by having to go and do measurements and do model validation, when in a lot of cases the conclusions might be foregone as to what the answers are going to be. Yeah, I think that sentiment was echoed by a number of the delegates from other states. I think it's fair to say that Federal Highway acknowledges the desire for and usefulness of screening. At the summit, Mark spoke of a 2-lane low-volume screening tool that's being developed by the Volpe Center as a replacement for the old T&M Look program. You'd enter in the volumes by vehicle type and have pull-down menus for speed and distance. And right now there's some work going on to define what a low-volume road really is in terms of the sound levels produced. We know that Kansas DOT uses about 1,200 vehicles per day in its noise policy, whereas in contrast, the manual and uniform traffic control devices defines low volume as 400 or fewer vehicles per day. And AASHTO uses 400 vehicles per day in its definition of very low volume roads. Regardless of the threshold, it's still important to note that if any screening tool does identify impacts, 772 still obviously requires the abatement feasibility and reasonableness analysis. Kentucky Transportation Cabinet has recently revised its policy to look at some of these issues, and it used a tool that you may not all be aware of called NAFRAT from Federal Highway that allows you to assess different policy changes in a spreadsheet format. That's available on the FHWA website. And Kentucky is one of the first that we know of who exercised that to try to look at some of these things. One of the changes that they made based on the analysis was to focus in just on the front row benefited receptors when they do their noise reduction design goal testing. But in terms of a way of doing screening, they had an interesting twist in the feasibility criterion. It was set at 5 dB at a minimum of 3 impacted receptors for a barrier to be feasible. And so if you had an isolated single or pair of receptors, it would fail on feasibility, and then you wouldn't carry forward into the reasonableness analysis. And what was the name of that tool again? Oh, my screen graphic, there it is. We weren't able to get permission to use that white duck that sells insurance, so we have our own Federal Highway duck to tell us that the name of that tool is NAFRAT. And I'm only able to make fun of that because I came up with that silly acronym myself. Apart from the typical screening that we think of in the project development process, which is shown over here on the right of this complex flow chart that I'm not going to cover, Florida DOT is looking at other opportunities to do screening ahead of project development in the planning stage on the left and the programming stage for projects in the center. Right now they have an environmental technical advisory team of state and federal resource agencies that are involved early in scoping and issues at the planning and programming stage. And so there are some opportunities to introduce noise in a proactive manner without having to do formal modeling or assessment to help understand noise as a potential impact within the whole transportation program. So coming out of the session, by far the greatest interest out of all the topics in the whole summit was more technical assistance and guidance with the screening. The first item there is on screening for impacts, and the second item is trying to minimize abatement evaluation once you do have identified isolated impacts. Also some interest in more work on the screening tool shown in the fourth item below. Research needs, again, more on both the types of screening methods and even interest in a regulatory change to be definitive about the use of screening methodologies. The fourth session looked at the cost-effectiveness, reasonableness criteria. You can see the presenters involved in this session. I kicked this off presenting some research that we and RSG and Environmental Acoustics had done for FHWA on the feasibility and reasonableness criteria. One of the products of that was the NAFRAT tool that I mentioned that Kentucky had recently used. Just shown here was just one very interesting finding to set the stage for this session, which was the wide range in the cost reasonableness criteria. Now, because there's such a variety in the barrier unit costs, the only way that we could really compare criteria from one state to the other was to normalize them all in terms of a barrier surface area for benefit of receptor, which is shown in this graph. So we've got surface area along the bottom and number of state policies along the vertical axis. And the graph shows when you normalize these out, we've got this tremendous range in criteria from under 400 square foot per benefit receptor to almost 2,800. And so obviously you can expect you're going to get very different decisions on identical or very similar projects from state to state. Of interest here, about 2/3 of the states are in the 1,000 to 1,600 square foot per benefited receptor range. And so along that line, New Hampshire right now is in the process of modifying its policy to move from a cost-based criteria to an area-based criteria. And they're also blending in some additional or optional factors, moving from a base of 1,500 square feet for benefited receptor. They will decrease, they plan on decreasing that base based on the percentage of benefited receptors that were permitted for development within a year after the policy implementation. But on the bottom of the slide, if the locality has implemented noise-compatible planning, they'd increase that base allowance of square footage as they determine reasonableness. So as I understand that policy is not quite finalized yet, going through some internal review. Tennessee DOT has used a number of allowances for a number of years in its policy prior to the 2011 change when they moved over to an area-based criterion. They have a base allowance, and that base allowance actually depends on whether or not the community pre-dated or post-dated the highway. And then additional square footage allowances if it was a previously studied Type 1 project based on the future noise level, based on the increase in level, and whether or not noise-compatible planning was in place at the local level. One of the tools that we found interesting was a WFR, Warranted, Feasible, and Reasonable worksheet that Virginia DOT has developed. And they use that to document the decision-making process and becomes part of the project file as a barrier analysis is completed. It's done for each impacted area that warrants consideration of abatement and finalized before they go into their final noise abatement design report. So this type of documentation is just an example of something that is a good way of having a good documentation of the decisions made on a project. Georgia DOT has also gone through some policy revisions that I believe were just approved last month. They tried to provide clearer guidance on feasibility and reasonableness. The concern here that they were getting some differing interpretations because of the wording in the policy in terms of their overall goal, which was really reducing impacts, not simply just to meet the noise reduction design goal. And they were trying to reduce the amount of modeling differences that they were getting from different consultants. They updated their cost estimates and their unit cost based on their last 5 years' actual costs. They didn't change their unit cost or reasonableness, their reasonableness cost criterion, which was $55,000 per benefited residence. One interesting feature here is that the building permits are not considered valid or current if they've been in existence for more than 3 years and the property still has not been developed. In terms of the roadmap items, for technical assistance and guidance, the first item, a lot of interest in what costs to include or not include in the barrier unit cost, and there's a lot of variability in what states are using. And down at the bottom, just more information on the advantages and disadvantages or benefits and disbenefits of using the area-based method compared to the cost-based method. Research for that, as well as the top 3 items on the list, all involving dealing with the costs that go into the both the unit cost and the cost criterion. Although no real need for any regulatory change was identified in this session. The other of the reasonableness criterion that was examined, and again a lot of interest in this, was the consideration of the viewpoints of the owners and the residents living near the project. As with the previous session, I kicked this off on the follow-up to that same research project that RSG, ourselves, and EA had done, looking specifically at this criterion, just again to set the stage. And the takeaway from this is that there's a lot of different bases that the SHAs are using in the decision-making process. Some are going in terms of a vote in favor of the project, while others are requiring a vote opposed to the project. Some are going based on just percentage of votes received, or others have been using a percentage of all of the possible votes, whether or not they were actually submitted or returned or not. There's a lot of different weighting schemes by owner, occupant, non-owner, occupant, and renter, and a wide variety of uses of extra weighting to the votes based on, for example, whether they're first row benefited receptors or not, whether they're impacted or not. And Utah actually brings into play the amount of noise reduction that the benefited receptors would be getting in terms of how many votes a property would get. And so we had some examples from some of the participants. Wisconsin, their process involves 1 vote each for owner-occupants and off-site owners. So rental properties actually get 2 votes to 1 vote for an owner-occupied property. They just require a simple majority of the returned ballots. If they don't get at least a 50% response rate, they'll go out for a second solicitation. But if that still comes in under 50%, they'll go ahead with the project. One thing of interest, they try as much as possible to hold a public involvement meeting and do the actual voting no more than 2 years away before the actual project letting. The hope being here that those who voted will still be in the properties being affected when it comes around to project development time. They also invite the owners and renters across the road, but they're obviously not allowed to vote. And they do gather in comments at the information meeting on color and texture, trying to give preference to the residents on the residential side and to local government on the highway side. Oregon DOT is similar in the first couple aspects of this. If they don't get a 50% response rate, they'll go back and poll a second time. And even if they end up not still with under 50%, they'll go ahead with the project, and the majority of the return votes or voting points will determine the outcome. They give the owner and renter, as Wisconsin did, each 1 vote on single-family properties, but then they have sort of a unique way of looking at the multi-unit properties. Apartment complexes, the property owner gets 1 vote, And then based on the return ballots of all of the renters, there's one collective yes or no vote for the renters. Condominiums, the owner occupants of each unit and the offsite owners each get a vote, and the renters for the rental units get one collective vote, just like the apartments. In contrast with mobile home parks and trailer parks, the property owner gets one vote and each resident gets one vote, not a collective vote. So just some interesting twists on the voting process there. Minnesota DOT was a very interesting case. They had a noise barrier audit called for by their state legislature, and a noise policy review process was developed. The goal here was to have an increased transparency in the barrier policy decision making. And they put together a policy advisory committee that consisted of 3 state representatives, 3 state senators, and 2 citizens who actually voted on the draft policy revisions for 2015. The policy then went out for public comment before going to FHWA for approval. In the review, they had previously had a process of giving more points for owner residents and then non-resident owners and then renters, and they retained that. They also gave twice the voting points to the abutting properties, and they retained that as well. But the change that they made was in how the decision was made. Previously, they were saying that 50% or more of all the possible points had to be against the project for the barrier not to go forward. And that was changed to 50% or more of only the ballots cast, the points cast, had to be in favor. So again, the non-votes were not being counted one way or another. And then the really interesting part of this is that if they got less than 25% of the possible votes back after 2 attempts, they would say that the barrier would not be reasonable, would not go forward because of the low response rate. North Carolina also presented a very interesting case, the controversy over voting in Charlotte. Their previous policy said the barrier would be reasonable if the majority of all possible votes, as was in Minnesota, but if all possible votes was in favor. And when they came to the policy revisions in 2011, they changed that to say that the barrier would be reasonable unless a majority of all possible votes were opposed. So essentially here a non-vote was considered a yes vote. The issues they had with this, that a lot of barriers were proposed in the Charlotte area. I think it was from 24 different barriers. And many of them passed this criterion in part because of the low return rates. And yet there was a lot of public opposition to a number of these downtown barriers about blocking the views of the skyline. There was also controversy that rental properties that were vacant were not being balloted. They were being excluded from the property, even though they might be able to be rented. There was a requirement for some design changes to the downtown walls that required revoting. And so there was an extensive process of lobbying and outreach back and forth, and it turned out that the 2 downtown walls that had previously been passed were defeated. Because of this extensive outreach, FHWA then required NCDOT to apply that same level of detailed outreach to the rest of the project. So for 22 other barriers around the area, they had to go out and reballot some 1,500 owners and tenants so they'd have a consistent approach. It turned out none of the decisions were changed on those barriers. So the big takeaway here is on the not counting of the non-votes as either yes or no. And so we see in terms of the roadmap a good amount of interest, again, in more technical assistance and guidance. How much effort is needed to get responses, the second item. What are the best ways to do the weighting of the owner and tenant votes? What are voting procedures to use for special use residential facilities such as prisons, college dorms, assisted living facilities, and other things like that. No real call for more research, just really technical guidance, and not much of a call for research, or regulatory change, except on that last item, where some states expressed interest in being able to consider the viewpoints or provide votes to first-row residents who may not be benefited or impacted, but they may be acoustically, but they may be impacted by the presence of the barrier at the edge of or near their property. So after those topics, which are all centered around issues within 23 CFR 772, Mark gave a briefing on the status of TNM 3.0 and the implementation plans. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I just wanted to show you the items he talked about. If you have questions on that, I think they could be brought up during the question and answer period. And Mark said he'd certainly entertain questions afterwards on this topic. He talked about the beta testing program that was just starting, or just going to start shortly after the summit, the development schedule, the validation process, the release process. In terms of outreach, or a number of things that will be coming along in terms of some short webinars on some of the features of the standalone version of the program and the extensions for MicroStation, AutoCAD, and ArcGIS. There'll be some brochures. There'll be some web-based workshops on some of the features. Training, the user guide, the standalone version of TNM3 will have a built-in user guide, and there'll be separate user guides for each of the three extensions. In-depth training is expected to be some third-party training courses available. And then he also briefly addressed some of the other vendor programs, environmental noise models, SoundPlan and Cadna-A. They still can't be, their TNM components still can't be used, and their 3.0 versions won't be able to be used until they pass what's called a consistency test suite, a set of requirements that Federal Highway has, testing a variety of different TNM modeling scenarios to prove their results equal those in TNM3. Takeaways in the roadmap, not much need was seen for regulatory change or research, but interest in self-taught training modules, the first item, learning more about the phase-in process before use of the program is required, and then just more interest in training and some of the changes in the features. That wrapped up the first day. It was a real productive and busy day. The second day, Mark kicked it off talking about just some miscellaneous program items, and Mary Ann Rondinella also talked about the reevaluation process. So some highlights of that. There's a lot on this slide, and again, Mark would be glad to address more of these topics during the Q&A or afterwards. He was relating some of the updated FAQs on the website for transit-only projects, where if FTA has the lead and no federal aid highway funds, you need to use the FTA noise and vibration guidance document. I mentioned earlier about the auxiliary lanes for Type 1 projects, so the 2,500 foot length requirement. The soliciting of views, and this comes out of some of the work with Minnesota and North Carolina, where non-votes are not to be counted as either a yes or a no. And so this may require some SHAs to have policy changes. He talked about environmental justice and Title VI, the Civil Rights Act issues, and some recent HUD challenges on impacts on HUD-related properties by a couple DOT projects, where HUD was pushing for application of its 65 dB day-night level criterion. And so this is a subject of a lot of interest to a lot of us in the states and elsewhere. and so a lot of interest in keeping up to date and in tune as to how that's going to evolve. Mark spoke of the noise barrier inventory required by 772, hoping to have that out this spring. Dealt with the quieter pavements, they continue to be addressed. Any updates to noise policies, reminding everybody they have to go through division and headquarters approval. And then talked about some guidance available when you have existing noise barriers on a new project and how to deal with them in the analysis process. Marianne talked a bit about the reevaluation process, which as defined here is the process by which the states consult with FHWA to determine if the NEPA documents and the decisions remain valid after some time has passed and as project development proceeds. And she just pointed out some guidance available on NEPA reevaluations and 772. That's on the Federal Highway website and on the noise page and elsewhere from the Federal Highway Resource Center. Very good pair of articles on some FAQs on NEPA reevaluations. And the web links for both of these are given in the white paper. In terms of the roadmap items, and one interesting item, the fourth item down here really wasn't even on our radar coming into the workshop, but rumble strips and rumble stripes along the shoulder edge or the center line generated a lot of interest among the practitioners. There's sort of need for more guidance on how to deal with them. They're not Type 1 projects. Even more research. There's been a fair amount of research done, but not a lot of it has gotten into sort of the third octave band and frequency-specific components that could cause increased annoyance over regular traffic noise. And then you can see some of the other items dealing with the existing barriers, keeping tabs on the HUD finance properties and HUD's role in project NEPA project documents, and then on quieter pavements. And so that is the first part of what we wanted to cover. I'm going to turn it over to Darlene now and let her speak on the next four topics, and then I'll be coming back at the end.
Thanks, Bill, and hello, everyone. We'll move into our next topic, which was traffic noise modeling, best practices for modeling and review of models. There was significant interest expressed by most of the attendees at the summit that there's a desire to improve T&M modeling for various reasons, to improve accuracy, to ensure consistency of modeling from project to project and from analyst to analyst. Looks like I'm waiting for control here. Let me see. Let me see. Still not able to advance the slide. Okay, there we go. Just took a couple seconds. Federal Highway has already been aware of this desire by states regarding T&M modeling, and they actually have a research effort underway on best practices for T&M modeling. That research is being conducted by HMMH. The project has three primary components or research areas, including T&M object input, noise barrier design optimization, and T&M quality assurance. The T&M object input is going to focus on three items. Those include best sources of topographic and geospatial data. I know our sources have gotten much better over the years, and they are continuing to improve. Also, they're looking at guidance for development of traffic data and recommendations for any additional T&M output tables that we might like to have available to us when we do our T&M modeling. That research is essentially complete. Federal Highway expects to have that report posted on their website sometime in March. An example of a tool that has been developed and is being used to improve their TNM modeling is Virginia DOT's Entrada traffic worksheet and associated worst noise hour worksheet. We've got some screenshots shown in the slide here. The Entrada portion of their tool provides detailed hourly traffic, includes vehicle classifications. It calculates operational speeds and levels of service. And then the worst noise hour sheet uses that traffic data from Entrada to calculate those hourly sound levels and identify the worst noise hour, as shown over here on the screenshot on the right of your slide. Tennessee DOT provides TNM modeling guidance actually in two separate locations. They provide a section on generalized modeling in their noise procedures document. TDOT also developed a more detailed guidance document that's entitled Tennessee's Guidelines for Traffic Noise Modeling Using TNM. The covers of both of those documents are shown on your screen. TDOT also developed a pretty detailed QC/QA checklist that's also shown on your screen. There's actually just a portion shown on your screen. This checklist covers all of the input of TNM objects. As you can see, you've got your input object and then a task and a completed and notes. This checklist needs to be completed for all TNM runs that are done on TDOT projects, and then those are submitted when the TNM runs for the project are submitted. Florida DOT has a separate traffic noise modeling practitioner's handbook. It includes guidance on developing traffic data, TNM inputs, including how to conduct noise barrier optimization and development of recommendations. Their handbook also covers the public involvement process as well as noise study documentation. Oregon DOT has a noise study QC and report review checklist that they use, and it can be used by either the analyst or the reviewer or both. In addition to some of those more basic items that we generally check for in reviews, Oregon reviews the existing noise environment, including all the measurements and all the TNM model validation runs, the analysis results, including predicted sound levels, the analysis summary and contours for undeveloped lands. And Oregon also has a noise evaluation and recommendation form that needs to be completed for every noise barrier that they evaluate, so they do a QC/QA on that as well. In terms of the roadmap for traffic noise modeling, there was a desire for technical assistance and possibly some guidance on best practices for TNM modeling and or the review of TNM models, model validation, noise study process for local programs projects, which can sometimes pose an interesting issue in that the consultant or the locals that are doing that project may not have adequate knowledge or experience to conduct those noise studies. Also some assistance or guidance perhaps on determination of the worst noise hour traffic volume in addressing planned future projects within the limits of the project you're currently evaluating. For example, what we mean by that is if you have a widening project of an interstate and that your design year is 2040 and the long-range transportation plan may have an interchange project within your project limits in the year 2025, I need to make a decision on how you deal with that interim project that's not associated with the project you're evaluating at that time. There may be some opportunity for research on model validation, determination of worst hour sound levels, and how to address those, again, those future planned projects in your noise studies. There was really no call for any change to the regulation related to the traffic noise modeling. The next topic, also a lot of interest in design build projects as states are moving forward. This is becoming a more common delivery method for projects, and it poses some interesting challenges when noise barriers are included in those projects. We kicked off with Delaware DOT started off, and they provided an overview of their experiences using 3 different alternative project delivery methods, including the more traditional design bid build process, the construction manager, general contractor, or CMGC process, and the design build process. Delaware has not done a design build process or really any project that has included noise barriers. However, Georgia DOT has significant experience with design build projects and noise barriers. They call it striking a delicate balance when you are dealing with noise barriers on these types of projects. They've had a lot of challenges. Some of the challenges that they noted and talked about at the summit were differing interpretations of their noise policy, trying to fit these design build projects, which are very unique and dynamic, into the more traditional design bid build mode, and trying to figure out what the best times for public outreach and coordination are within that dynamic process. Bill mentioned previously that Georgia updated their noise policy recently, and they included in that update some other changes to close some of those loopholes and eliminate some of those other conflicts in their process related to the changing noise barrier design process within design build projects. It's not noted here, but Georgia has also used the design build finance project delivery method, and I believe some of those projects have included theirs as well. Florida DOT has also done many design build projects that have included barriers, and they have their own unique set of challenges that they talked about and presented. Some of their challenges have included defining the noise requirements in the request for proposal, dealing with those inevitable design changes that affect the noise analysis, because in design build, the design is continually evaluating after the project is let, and every time one of those changes are made in the design, that triggers a reevaluation of the noise conclusions and the noise abatement decisions. So it's kind of this chicken and egg thing that's happening throughout the design process. Some issues dealing with the tendency of contractors to evaluate designs that eliminate or modify FDOT's recommended noise barriers. The way design build projects are sometimes set up is that there's some cost sharing involved there. So if costs are able to be eliminated, then the contractor can share in those cost savings, and that can sometimes spur contractors to look to noise barriers as a possible area for elimination. Some issues dealing with the fact that because of the design build planning regulations, Florida requires that any subsequent noise analysis that's done as part of the reevaluation process must be done by FDOT, and it's not allowed to be done by the DB team. And therefore, they really need to have a project noise analyst involved from their end, from all the way through the project, all the way through the design build project, all the way till it's completed. Ohio DOT has also constructed numerous barriers on design build projects, and they shared some of their lessons learned on their projects. Some of these include that design changes cause delays and contracting issues, and they reduce the flexibility. And that the fast track schedules, these things are on tight schedules a lot of time, and that results in these shorter review times, and that reduces the ability of the state to effectively and efficiently identify the consequences of those changes, and so their ability to address these issues in a timely manner is compromised. ODOT believes that a better system of checks and balances would be beneficial, and that it would be in the DOT's best interest to negotiate to retain some of the ability to make these minor changes without incurring major costs or requiring time extensions on the project. And as a final note, ODOT considers all these factors when they're evaluating risk to kind of evaluate if a design build delivery method is the most appropriate for any given project. North Carolina DOT has also constructed a good amount of barriers on design-build projects. In fact, 80% of the noise walls that they are building have been on design-build projects. A few notes on North Carolina's experiences. North Carolina solicits viewpoints before the RFP for the project is issued. The design-build contract itself contains minimal noise criteria. The contractor is actually required to use the barrier design that is provided by NCDOT, and then any changes that are proposed must result in no net loss in noise reduction benefits for the project. North Carolina also noted that their current 10-day review period for changes is too short. Again, they're not able to effectively and efficiently evaluate the consequences of those changes in a short time. As another note, North Carolina began its first public-private partnership project last summer that included 21 noise barriers. Moving on to the roadmap here, there's definitely a desire for some technical assistance or guidance on the three areas shown here, and those are how to address noise barrier commitments during the design-build process. Again, when we make design changes, it changes the noise conclusions, and it can affect feasibility and reasonableness of noise abatement measures. So that is an area of concern for states. Desire for technical assistance in dealing with that whole noise process during reevaluation. It really is this chicken and egg process, and some additional guidance on that would be helpful. And finally, the cost-sharing mechanisms for noise barriers that are removed during the design process. I mentioned that certainly maybe there could be some disincentives for contractors to look to remove those barriers as they move through those types of design-build projects. There's really no need for research or regulation change in this area. Moving on to the next topic, this was the 10th session of the summit on construction noise and vibration and pre-construction evaluation. As Bill mentioned previously, there was a significant focus on effects on wildlife in this session. Several states noted various issues with construction noise effects on wildlife. Montana uses a three-part approach in dealing with these potential wildlife effects. It includes avoidance, minimization, and mitigation, three terms we see often in NEPA. But they've noted they have had a lot of challenges with doing the analysis and the assessment and monitoring and mitigation. And they really noted a lot of issues dealing with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service having requested inappropriate timing restrictions on projects and applying noise criteria from different environments and for different species than what they are evaluating in Montana. Several other states noted issues similar to those in Montana, including similar issues with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and those were Idaho, Utah, Alaska, and Florida. There was just generally an agreement and a call that there really is a desire for some better science on this topic to help address these issues that a lot of states are having. Alaska noted that they have a lot of projects in marine environments, and they are currently conducting some of their own research to improve the science. And they also noted that there may be some potential for a programmatic agreement regarding the sound and pile driving activities in those environments. Keeping with the theme of wildlife effects, Caltrans recently completed guidance on the hydroacoustic effects of pile driving on fish. I've got a little shot of the cover of that document down here on the bottom of your slide. They are also currently working on similar publications for birds and bats, and those will be also uploaded on their website when they become available. Moving over to the human side, Caltrans also has a separate transportation and construction vibration noise manual. The cover of that document is shown here on your screen, and that is also available on Caltrans' website. Staying on the human side of things, Minnesota DOT developed a special provision for projects that involve nighttime construction. They do allow nighttime construction or require or need nighttime construction on some projects, realizing that this is a unique situation that they needed to deal with, so they developed a special provision for nighttime construction. It specifies the activities that are prohibited, as well as other requirements and procedures. It also identifies mitigation measures project by project. In conjunction with the development of the SP, they felt that it would be a good idea to educate the contractors on this special provision. So they were proactive, and they developed an online training course. You've got a screenshot of that shown here on your slide. And so all the contractors and their employees are required to complete this online training for projects that are going to require nighttime construction. In terms of the roadmap for construction noise and vibration, a clear desire for some technical assistance or guidance and possible research on coordination with sister agencies on wildlife effects. Also on assessment procedures for wildlife. On the human-related side, there's a desire for technical guidance or maybe some research on construction noise and vibration criteria, analysis methods, and mitigation techniques. And just to note, there is an NCHRP research project underway currently to improve Federal Highway's current roadway construction noise model, RCNM, and hopefully that will help satisfy some of the human-related research need that was expressed in our survey. Finally, there was some desire or call for a potential regulation change to address the wildlife effects. The current regulation that we deal with is human-based, frequent human use, and so we don't address wildlife in our current noise studies. I'm waiting to advance here. Apologize. Got a little lag here, I guess. I'm not really sure why this is taking a little bit longer. I appear to be stuck.
Katie, this is Bill. Do you want to take control or pass control over to me? We can try to advance it.
Yeah, I was trying to advance it as well, and it's not advancing for me either.
Oh. Maybe Darlene can do some hand puppets on the screen for everybody.
I'm sure everyone would love that.
Okay, try it now.
Hey, got it. Excellent. The next session, which was the second to the last session of the summit, was on noise barrier materials, designs, and costs. Okay, I was able to advance. So, Ohio DOT shared some of their experiences on this topic. They noted that they survey both residents and local governments on materials and aesthetics. So not just the residents, but they actually go to the local governments, which is, that varies from state to state, and whether states even consider the viewpoints on aesthetics for the residents. ODOT has made efforts to educate their management on the benefits of these different systems. They have a review and approval process for new products that involve several ODOT offices, the ones listed on your slide here. They also require that the contractor construct a control panel for acceptance in accordance with their noise barrier specification. So that is done for all of their projects that involve noise barriers. And then throughout the course of the construction of the project, they inspect those barriers frequently to ensure that any issues are addressed in a timely manner. Wisconsin's noise wall material approval process is similar to Ohio's. They require suppliers to provide independent test results for things such as flame and smoke indexes, sound transmission loss, salt scaling resistance, accelerated weathering, and corrosion resistance. They also require third-party certification of compliance for metal and wood barriers in their components and treatments. They noted that structural and foundation designs must be in compliance with AASHTO specifications that are currently included in Section 15 of the LRFD design specification. Colorado DOT, they had a previous noise wall materials guidelines document, and they are currently in the process of modifying that. They've established a diverse study team with representatives from not only noise but materials and design, plus a resident engineer and a bridge engineer as well. They're trying to add more objectivity to their process for determining if a new material should be added to their approved product list. Team is evaluating objective guidelines such as the noise reduction design goal, subjective guidelines, and some other things such as structural durability and aesthetics in their process. In terms of the roadmap for noise barrier materials, designs, and costs, there's a desire for technical assistance or guidance and possible research on maintenance or replacement of existing noise barriers. We didn't talk about that, but the noise barrier systems are aging, and we have maintenance issues, and certainly there are times when existing noise barriers or parts of noise barriers need to be replaced. So there's an interest in assistance or guidance on that topic. Also, material costs versus bid installed costs. There are a lot of issues with estimating costs, and those do vary by material. And barrier design and testing specifications was also noted as a possible area of technical assistance, guidance, or research. There was really no desire for or call noted for any kind of regulation change on this topic. So with that, I will turn it back over to Bill to cover the final topic and roadmap and summarize. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Darlene. Not sure if I have, don't have, there I do. Good. Now, the last topic was something that was identified in the planning process as something of interest. It really encompasses three things: tech transfer, training, and recruiting. And it turned out to be a big topic of interest at the webinar, at the summit. One important resource available to the state programs is the Highway Traffic Noise Work Group within AASHTO. This is chaired by Danielle Schellenberger of PennDOT, and it's under this AASHTO SCOE, or the Standing Committee on the Environment. And as of the summit, it had 26 different member states. The purpose was to provide a forum for various noise issues to be addressed and for information exchange among the member states. And there's a lot of interest in recruiting more states into this work group and to becoming more active in a number of ways. I'll give a few ideas in a moment. But clearly, the need for more tech transfer was identified. Some of us are getting older, and so recruiting of new people into the field is a concern and is an issue, and there is some difficulty with it. Oregon DOT shared some of their experiences in getting and hiring qualified staff, finding potential candidates that have noise or air quality experience. Sometimes it's difficult to sell state employment to consultants to make the move. Maybe not as difficult going the other direction. They identified really a relatively small pool of locally qualified individuals and adopted a position of trying to hire for air quality or noise and then training for the other. I think many of us have come into the noise field by one route or another, and a few directly from previous education directly in noise or air quality. Oops, excuse me. Some of the ideas coming out of this session, there are 3 regional groups within the AASHTO noise work group, and there's talk of possibly adding a 4th group to align with the traditional AASHTO regions, have a chair person of each of these groups, and let them become ways of gathering the input from their member states within that region and being able to present sort of a unified view to Federal Highway rather than a series of individual states needing to come individually to Federal Highway. There's a program that AASHTO has that could be of interest to us in terms of materials evaluation. It's called their NETPEP program, National Transportation Product Evaluation Program. States contribute to this program to do research and certification testing of different types of highway materials and systems, and this has not been used for noise barriers, but it is something that could be done. The results of the work are only available to those participating states, but there is an opportunity perhaps if some states wanted to go that way on some materials evaluation. Regarding training, there was a lot of interest in training courses, a lot of interest in more periodic webinars, whether they be done through AASHTO, TRB, or the National Highway Institute, even as frequently as quarterly. One takeaway out of the summit, there's a lot of interest in these topics, and webinars, whether they be on modeling or they be on policy, be a really good way for technology transfer. And in terms of the recruiting, there are some comments and ideas, some experiences on opening up the recruiting, not to go beyond the traditional civil requirements, looking at majors in atmospheric science and in environmental health, where the environmental health program, national program, actually has some air quality and noise training involved or education involved in the program. There are a lot of different subjects here in the roadmap, all for technical assistance and guidance and not really for research and regulation change. Of greatest interest, as I just mentioned down in item 4 here, periodic webinars on topics of interest. Just finding a mechanism on the first item of making practitioners aware of new guidance and new FAQs, and coming up with some type of central library or repository, not only for literature and research reports, but for all the Q&A that goes on within the members within, for example, the AASHTO Noise Work Group. And then you can see there are other topics as well that I touched upon in the previous slides. So that gives you a picture of the flow of the summit, the things that were talked about, some of the outcomes from that. Just pulling together those different needs identified across the different topic areas. This first slide looks at tech assistance, the blue column. And of these 7 top topics, 6 of them involved either screening or tech transfer, where more guidance is needed. And there were a lot of topics not shown where there's still a high percentage of guidance, but for the sake of this slide, I just kept it to this first grouping. We talked about these individually, but again, just the takeaway that screening and tech transfer are 2 big technical needs. This next slide in the center green column shows the top needs for research that were identified. Not as much or as high a positive or a yes vote on these. And that topic that we hadn't even thought of coming into the summit on rumble strips and stripes was the one with the highest call for research. Darlene mentioned a couple of the items shown here on construction, assessing the procedures for wildlife, and coordinating with the Fish and Wildlife and other agencies shown down toward the bottom. Additional work on quieter pavements, looking at barrier cost variations by barrier material, and then again on research on screening methods for impacts and for abatement evaluation. And in terms of regulation change, not, again, a heavy response to change 23 CFR 772. Perhaps the greatest item dealt with, as I mentioned earlier, looking at the existing land uses in the activity categories, noise abatement criterion, and doing some adjustments on that, perhaps removing the park and ride lots. I'm not sure with this HUD push why that was really voted on as a research or regulation change need, perhaps only to emphasize the fact that you don't have to use the DNL, day-night level, in the assessments. But some regulation change needs with regards to screening and some of the other topics that we had discussed. So just to conclude the formal part of the presentation, Summit was a success. Nearly 80% of those who responded back found it to be extremely valuable, and I'd say most, or if not all of the others, found it to be valuable in one regard or another. This one comment really sums it up that we received back. There's really no substitution for face-to-face peer exchange. A big takeaway from the summit was that we had a real mix of some very experienced practitioners who've been doing this for a long time, and a lot who are relatively new to the game. As a matter of fact, in the process of developing our invitation list, we identified at least a dozen people who really weren't even on the TRB list of state highway noise representatives because of changes that had been made over the year. And many of those who attended the summit really have not had the opportunity to network with their peers through things such as the TRB Noise Committee annual meeting and summer meeting, largely just because of travel funding limitations. And so coming out of that, nearly 90% of the survey respondents would like to see periodic summits, either every year, every 2 years. But the next bullet here, that really contingent on outside travel funding. It's an absolute necessity. Even some of those who wanted to come were unable to come, even with the outside funding being provided. I think going forward, there'll be more emphasis on roundtable discussions, breakout sessions, and things like that. The decision was made on this one to focus in on one session where everybody could participate, share information on what states are doing, answer questions, or at least pose questions. I don't know how many were actually answered. But now I think the practitioners going forward with the states would like to hash out some of those questions and help move their noise programs forward. So if you do want more information, if you'd like to get copies of the PDFs of the PowerPoint presentations that our various presenters made, get a copy of the white paper roadmap document, all available on the Center for Environmental Excellence website at environment.transportation.org. You go to the environmental topics area if you're not familiar with the website, and in the pull-down menu, you grab the noise topic and then grab the summit, and you can see items that you can download from that website. So I'd just like to finish up here by acknowledging the Center for Environmental Excellence, Federal Highway Administration, and AASHTO for putting this together, Federal Highway especially for funding it, and for all of Mark's guidance on getting this together. Special thanks to the advisory group. They worked hard to come up with a program that would work well for their colleagues. And then thanks to everybody who stepped up, the presenters, the discussants, and all of the delegates. There was a lot of good dialogue and exchange, and I hope we captured some of that for you here today. So I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'll turn this back over to Kate, and she can moderate the Q&A with Mark or any questions you might have for Darlene or myself.
Thank you, Bill and Darlene. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. And if you haven't submitted a question yet, you should see a questions panel in your menu that you can submit a question, and I will direct them as appropriate. We do have a few questions, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Our first one is there a threshold for how long the auxiliary lane or widening lane should be for type 1?
Yes, this is Mark Fernie. We have a FAQ on our website that talks about that. The threshold is 2,500 feet, I believe, but you can go on to our website, onto the regulation and guidance tab, into the noise policy FAQs, and find that information.
Great, thanks, Mark. Our next question is, can we please have an update on the TNM 3.0 coming out for general consumption?
Yes, as Bill indicated, around the time of the summit, we were gearing up for the beta testing. The beta testing was done by 8 state DOTs. I'm probably going to forget the list. We had North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Michigan, Texas, Washington State, Ohio, I believe, was in Minnesota. Sorry, so I think that's the 8. So that finished up in early January. The contractor that's developing the interface for 3.0, Gannett Fleming, is in the process of compiling all those beta test comments in conjunction with what we got back from the Volpe Center, and we should be getting that potentially sometime this week. And from there, we'll work to prioritize those items that are needed to be done versus those items that would be nice to have done. The validation effort that the Volpe Center is doing should be completed at the end of March. The first phase of validation has been completed. That was analyzing 3.0 compared to 2.5 and identifying any differences that were found in that comparison. Phase 2 was looking at those differences and explaining why they're occurring. Is it something within 2.5? Is it something within 3.0 or some other category? So again, that should be completed the end of March. That's been on schedule for that time frame for some time now. And so there is some time, runtime issues that we're going to hopefully try to address. And once those 3 things kind of come together and cross each other, we will release 3.0 for optional use. We're not sure how long it will be out for optional use, but that would be the first intention, is just putting it out there. At some point, Federal Highways will either deem 3.0 consistent with the methodology of TNM per 23 CFR 772, or we'll do a regulatory change requiring the use of a 3.0. That's really going to be a question for our Chief Counsel's office, which we have not asked them about yet.
Okay, great, thanks, Mark. There is another question that you may have already addressed, but I'm going to throw it out there just in case we didn't. Related to this, does TNM 3.0 have availability to handle 3D design files?
I believe the answer is yes, and I apologize for not knowing that. There is a GIS graphical interface, as Bill had said. We have the standalone version. We also have extensions for AutoCAD, ArcGIS, and MicroStation, and so you have a lot of those capabilities in there. It's a lot of the similar interfaces that you've seen in 2.5, largely with a new look.
Okay, great. We also had a follow-up regarding the auxiliary lanes question. Someone indicated that they believe the Green Book showed length should be longer than 2,500 feet for high-speed facilities for safety reasons for reading concerns. Will there be coordination with Green Book to match noise standards? I think that's kind of a question for AASHTO, and I can certainly send that along to our subcommittee on design that works on the Green Book. I think at this time, we can't really answer that question one way or another, but certainly funnel it to the right AASHTO committee. I don't know, Mark, if there's anything that you'd like to follow up on that as well.
No, I mean, the 2,500 feet, I mean, we do make reference to AASHTO's policy on highway design or the Green Book in Institute of Transportation Engineers manual within our FAQ. And so, that was put into consideration. A lot of it was just the functionality of an auxiliary lane. Once you reach the 2,500 foot mark, it's acting more of a through lane. But yeah, I mean, Kate, that's something I guess we could jointly have a discussion about and see if we're on the mark or slightly off.
Okay, great. Let's see, what else do we have? Is an auxiliary lane that leads to an interchange considered an auxiliary lane that is a turn lane, thereby exempt from type 1?
If the lane is truly a turn lane, that it is exempt from type 1, per the definition of a type 1 project. So yes, if it is truly a turn lane, then it would be exempt.
Okay, great. Will TNM allow the importance of buildings and consider buildings for reflection and shield effects?
Yeah, so 3.0 is going to have the same building row features as 2.5, ground zone, terrain lines, all those features will be in 3.0. So they'll act in the same manner.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, will the low volume roads modeling tool be available soon?
We are hoping so. North Carolina DOT is doing a sensitivity analysis on low volume roads and really what it means for noise and noise levels. We're hoping to kind of piggyback on that effort and really have that help us define the threshold for using the tool. And there's some other items that came out of the summit that we'll have the Volpe Center make those modifications to the tool before we release it.
Okay, great. This next one I think is kind of an AASHTO question. It says, and maybe Mark, you have something that Federal Highways is offering as well. If one wanted to pull the group or seek feedback on a noise policy issue, to whom such a question be addressed? I think that as it relates to the AASHTO noise work group, if you want to get in touch with Danielle Schellenberg from PennDOT, she would be the one to send a question out to those that are participating in the work group, and they should be able to get out back to you. Mark, I don't know if there's any resources that Federal Highways offers as well in this regard.
I mean, you can send it to myself. You could also send it to your noise contact at the Federal Highway Division offices within your state. We do have an environmental SharePoint forum that questions are often posted on that. So, I mean, that's something that we can do internal to Federal Highways. I do think, Kate, your option that you explained with the AASHTO Noise Work Group and working through Danielle, or if these regional or become up and running and contact your regional person and kind of field it through them. I think that's the best way of getting other state DOT perspectives, and also gets everyone engaged. I think everyone came out of the summit really engaged with each other and really was riding the high of wanting to continue the correspondence and tech assist with each other, and that would just enable that even more.
Great, and I just received a follow-up to that as well. Someone indicating that questions can also be sent through the TRB ADC 40 group with Hugh Sewerman. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but that's another resource that I think that the practitioners can use to tap into TRB's resources as well.
That's correct. I mean, the ADC 40 has a very large group of friends, members that consist of federal, state, consultants, academia, so you can get a lot of feedback from that as well. It just depends, I guess, what you're asking and what you're hoping to get back.
Great. Our next question, Mark, is there future plans to update FHWA's noise measurement guidance document?
Yes, that is something that has come to light over the past year or so, is people having difficulty with the measurement requirements, and so it is something we've talked about internally and may end up doing that at some point.
Okay, the next one is, what drop-off rate per doubling the distance does TNM use to predict noise at recipient locations within soft ground and recipient location within hard ground?
I might have Bill just respond to that one if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. It's greater than the traditional 3 dB hard ground and 4.5 dB for doubling a distance soft ground that we used in prior modeling, on the order of perhaps as much as 5 to 6 dB per doubling, maybe a little bit more doubling a distance depending on the ground type. TNM has got a variety of different ground types in it, from pavement and water as a hard surface on up through powder snow, and so they each have their own drop-off rates. But for soft sites, it is greater than the 4.5 per doubling a distance.
Great, thanks, Bill. The next one I have is, will FHWA be issuing guidance on conditions that would warrant a screening level noise evaluation? If so, when?
Well, there will be some safeguards, some caveats within the low traffic volume tool that we've been talking about. We kind of get into some of those concerns when states come to us and wanting to put screening procedures in their noise policies. There are quite a few states that have them in there. Virginia has some, Oregon, Pennsylvania are the ones that just kind of pop out in my head. So Idaho, and so you might want to check out some of those states' policies, or even have a discussion within the AASHTO noise work group and see what some of that wording is for those different policies.
Great. The next one is, will TNM 3.0 be available to import GIS tabular attributes of shapefile inputs, such as roadway width, traffic volume, speeds, etc.?
As I always tell everyone, I'm not an IT guru, so trying to understand what that question is. My understanding is you bring up your roadway design and whatever program you're using, whether it's MicroStation, ArcGIS, AutoCAD, whatever it is, and you then kind of design your TNM attributes over top of that and then export it out to the standalone version. So I think the answer of that is yes, but within that environment.
And I think I would just add that the platform for TNM3 is a GIS-based platform as opposed to the CAD-based platform within TNM 2.5.
Correct. Thanks, Bill.
We have a question regarding an NCHR report that's 2549, construction noise modeling be implemented into TNM, and will FHWA be reestablishing suggested noise impact criteria?
There isn't any consideration right now to modify 23 CFR 772 within the construction parameters of the regulation. The NCHRP project was really, the purpose of it was taking our current RCNM, roadway construction noise model, which is really just a spreadsheet with an interface type tool, and kind of take it to the next level. And so the winning proposal for that NCHRP project was awarded to Gannett Fleming, who is currently developing the interface for 3.0. And so they're actually going to integrate construction noise emissions and modeling into the TNM 3.0 environment. And so in the future, you'll be able to model construction noise within what you would be used to for the 3.0 TNM normal environment.
Okay, the next one is the guidance to avoid overlapping of roadways and ground zones in TM 2.5 still in effect?
Yes. I don't know if that's something that's different in 3.0 or not, but it is currently still in effect.
Great. For the applicability of auxiliary lanes as Type 1 projects, is the interchange ramp considered a turn lane?
Well, interchange ramps has its own definition under Type 1, so you would have to look at that that definition under Type 1 for that situation.
Okay. Is there a difference in drop-off rate per doubling of the distance between TM 2.5 and 3.0? What are the old and the new rates?
Between 2.5 and 3.0, I believe they're no different. There shouldn't be any difference.
Okay. Still have some time for a few more questions if folks still want to send some in. There was a question about, will this PowerPoint also be available? Yes, we will make the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint deck that you saw today available on the Center for Environmental Excellence's website, environment.transportation.org. It was another question, let's see, indicating federal highways guidance is needed on the level of detail required in TNM runs. Some states require what I refer to as micro TNM modeling. For instance, 12-foot panel length with a 1/4 inch height is a TNM runway for every lane at 50-foot increments on an 8-lane section, etc. Has any sensitivity analysis been done regarding what level of detail is adequate?
I mean, that's something that we've always talked about, and I think we'll kind of hack at that over the years. As Bill had mentioned, part of the presentation was some best modeling practices for TNM. That should be posted actually here within a week or so, so that should be helpful. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we acknowledge that different users are going to, do things a little bit different, and obviously the results are going to be drastically different. There is also the NHTSA 791 report that talks about different situations that you might be modeling. It might not get into the level of detail that this question was asking, but it does give certain recommendations for certain situations that you might be in.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. The next one is regarding multimodal projects in which Federal Highways is the lead agency. Will more guidance be made available on acceptable ways to model and access noise from rail transit?
Yeah, the rail transit issue is interesting. As Bill indicated earlier, in the summit we had talked about some of the FAQs that came out, and we do have one on transit related projects, and is it a transit only project versus if it is truly a multimodal project, and you can go on our website and look at that FAQ, but in essence, if it's a transit only project, you're going to be following FTA's procedure versus Federal Highways procedure is what it calls out, at least in the FAQ. We do have some guidance on that. If we do get to a point of updating some of our measurement documents, it's probably something that we'll include within that update.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, for any of the methods for sharing information, it would be convenient for consultants to access to. I think that from the Center for Environmental Excellence standpoint, we do try to make all of our webinars and PowerPoint presentations and handbooks and roadmaps available to consultants, and there's a wide distribution. And as we're looking at the roadmap for further implementation of activities for noise practitioners, we will certainly work with the consulting community, and I think maybe there's also a opportunity for AASHTO to partner with ACEC. Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add on reaching out to the consulting community.
Yeah, I mean, our standard procedure whenever we release something is, in fact, we just released some information on updated guidance on pavement as an abatement measure, and I can't remember the other thing that we had just released. But anyway, our standard procedure is internally we put something on our environmental Federal Highway SharePoint site. I asked Danielle Schellenberger to also send something out to the AASHTO Noise Work Group, and then I asked Hugh Sorman to send something out via the ADC 40 group. Oh, the other thing was this webinar that we have today. And aside from that, there really isn't, I think, much more we can do. I mean, it's on our website. We do try to post as many things as possible. We're getting into a mindset of, doing some webinars and posting the PowerPoints. And so, aside from making everything as public as possible and alerting people that stuff is out there, it's kind of hard to find other options.
Okay, great. The next one he had is, if low-volume screening is adopted, will states have to abandon their current screening methodologies?
No. I mean, we might have to look at some of them. I don't recall all the text of all different screening procedures and different state noise policies. But, I mean, this is going to be very specific to low-volume roads. So it should just be used in addition to or in conjunction with, but not as a replacement of.
Great. Next one we have is kind of a scenario question. Would a picnic bench outside an industrial facility be considered sensitive and included in a noise analysis? What about a bus stop?
A bus stop could potentially. The picnic area and industrial site, I mean, obviously industrial sites are not noise sensitive. If you found that it was a really frequent area of human use, it might be something that we would need to consider, but typically I would say no.
Okay. Is the addition of an HOV bypass lane on an existing on-ramp considered a Type 1 project?
Are you adding, I guess if you're adding a new lane, then yes, because Type 1 definition includes the addition of a new HOV lane or hot lane. I know in some cases we get into some gray areas of what states are doing, and in those cases I would just recommend that you talk to your division office and they can reel me in as needed.
Okay, do you know if there is a tool to predict sound reflections off a single barrier in TNM 3.0?
There's actually an NCHRP project. No, the barrier reflection has not been turned on within TNM, but the noise NCHRP project is looking at barrier reflection off of a single barrier.
Great.
Mark, this is Bill here. I think in TNM 3.0, the barrier reflection component is it going to be available?
That's the plan.
Okay, yeah. I think that's what the question was asking. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was within the current. Sorry.
So there were a couple questions regarding NHI courses, and the first one is, I didn't see reference to the NHI highway noise course as an available or required noise training resource. Will there be a course? Will this course continue to be available through NHI and perhaps updates for policy and software updates?
Yes, I mean we currently have the NHI noise course. Unfortunately, due to increasing costs, NHI had increased the cost from, I believe it was originally $600 a participant to now $1,000 starting January 1st of 2016. But yeah, I mean that course is still available. It's an excellent course. It's absolutely great. Most people leave it, I think, somewhat overwhelmed by the amount of information that they're provided. But it's a 3-day course. I mean, if we don't get states wanting to host it, I think the desire to continue to spend the money and effort to update it might become less and less, but it's there. We want people to utilize it, and again, it's a great course.
Great. There's also a question regarding the web-based training. I know, Mark, that you mentioned that just due to continuing costs that the 3-day training was increased. Can you talk a little bit about the cost of the web-based training? It appears that some state DOTs used to have it at free of cost.
Yeah, that's I don't work within the environment of NHI. I'm not one of those NHI Federal Highway employees, but that is accurate. I mean, when the web-based courses were first released, they were free to state DOT users. At this point, we only have lesson 1, which is basic acoustics, that is web-based, which is also within the instructor-led 3-day course that I just talked about. For whatever reason, I'm not sure what the rationale was, NHI has decided to charge a nominal fee. I want to say it's like $10 or something like that. It might be more for non-state entities. I'm not positive on that, but NHI has been desiring or kind of seeking additional web-based courses. I think it's a lower cost for them overall, so we might see more things go web-based than in person, but there is currently a nominal fee.
Great. And related to training still, do you know of any training that is currently scheduled or anything upcoming that this group might want to be made aware of?
Well, with NHI, there's no current host hosting a session, so there's nothing on the books for that. I know Bill Bowlby, him and his crew have a T&M course, I think scheduled sometime in April. You can probably go on his website and find the exact dates, but that's a 2.5 training course.
Mark, that'll be April 25th through 29th.
Okay, thanks.
Great, that's really helpful. Not sure if this one's for Mark or Bill. There was a question regarding the TDOT modeling checklist of whether or not it was available online.
I'll let Darlene answer that.
I'll try. I'll have to check. Right now, TDOT actually, the whole state of Tennessee redid their web-based system last year, and they're still working through making sure that all of the documents that were there before are up there. I'm not sure if we had planned to have that particular checklist up there. I need to check, but certainly it's available. TDOT makes that available to anyone who would like to use it or adopt it to other states. So you can always contact me, and we can get a copy of that to you.
Great. We just have a few more minutes. I have a couple more questions here to go through, but if anyone else has a burning question, go ahead and get that in, and we'll try to answer it by the end of our time. Mark, I know that you've been busy as the only headquarters individual working on noise, and there was a question regarding any additional staff being added to headquarters since Adam Alexander's departure.
Yeah, so sometime our hiring freeze finally lifted, and so sometime back in the fall, I don't remember when the advertisement went out, we did do an advertisement to hire Adam's replacement. I know that's going through the process, and I can check with my management and find out the status of that.
Great. Well, I have one last question that I think is a good one to end on. There was a question regarding pushing items forward on the roadmap and kind of the roles and responsibility and how that's going to be handled. So I'll take a first crack at it and then pass it over to Mark. You know, I agree there are a lot of great items in here, and I think that both the AASHTO SCOE leadership through our SCOE steering committee, the environmental process subcommittee, and especially the noise work group that's led by Danielle Schellenberg, we'll need to take a look at that to kind of see if there's any opportunities for work within our committee structure. I would also mention to the participants today that the Center for Environmental Excellence is going to be doing a call for research ideas. And so if there are ideas that were either generated by the white paper and roadmap or ideas that came out of the summit back in October, I do encourage you to submit those ideas to our TERI database on the center website, environment-transportation.org. And then I think there'll also be an opportunity for AASHTO staff in conjunction with Federal Highways and the Center for Environmental Excellence Advisory Board to look at future activities. It seems as if future peer exchanges or summits, communities of practice, or webinars might be viable next steps for the center to assist with. Mark, any thoughts from Federal Highways?
Yeah, I mean, Kate, what you said I think was great. I echo a lot of those points. I think, I think we were all hoping one of the outcomes of the summit would be where AASHTO could kind of run with the roadmap and see what they would want to undertake, which obviously you just talked about, Kate. I mean, Federal Highways, that was our intent as well. I would hope that state DOTs, either individually or collectively, would want to look at the roadmap and maybe kind of, do their own research or team up to do research. I would hope that ADC 40 would also look at it and try to team up with states and AASHTO and Federal Highways to try to get NCHRP projects initiated. I know Rob Effinger had given ADC 40 a draft copy of the roadmap back for the annual meeting, and we had a research needs part of our highway subcommittee meeting, and just trying to flesh out some of those needs. I think it's a good state of the concern, and looking at what when you look at the full roadmap. I mean, you had screenshots that Bill and Darlene had talked about where it was kind of mapped out between technical assistance and regulatory changes and research, and I think that nice breakdown is going to help us just kind of shape of what we need to do or what we might want to do, what the pressing issues are, and so I just hope collectively we all utilize it and kind of pick off different topics of concern and try to get them worked out.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Before I wrap things up, I just wanted to give Mark the opportunity for any concluding remarks before I close things up today.
Well, first of all, I appreciate everyone who registered and participated today. We had a great turnout, so I greatly appreciate that. This summit was something that I was very excited that it kind of got past the funding stages, and just getting all the states, or majority of the states, together in a single room and having them talk to each other, I think was just phenomenal. I'm really excited about the roadmap. I do think it's something that we all can collectively look at it and try to make the noise program area just better at the federal level, at the state level, and so I was really glad. Bill Baldwin Associates did a great job planning and executing the summit and coming up with the roadmap and white paper. So I greatly appreciate their efforts and AASHTO's efforts as well. So thank you.
Great,
thank you, Mark. I needed to give one geeky clarification, Kate, before you close on one of the questions about the T&M drop-off rates. When I said it was greater than 3 dB on hard surfaces, I meant the hard soil surface type. If you're looking at pavements and water, it's still a traditional 3 dB per doubling of distance. And with that geeky addition, I'll sign off.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Well, thank you, Mark, Bill, and Darlene, and especially thank you for all of you out there who attended today's webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the Center for Environmental Excellence staff through environment@ashto.org, or you can contact me or my team members directly. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation will be available in the near future on the Center's website at environment.transportation.org. On behalf of AASHTO, the Center for Environmental Excellence, and Federal Highways, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This will conclude the webinar today. Thank you.